The morning light came in flat and gray through the tall windows of St. Augustine's reception hall, the kind of light that flattens everything it touches: faces, flowers, intentions. Daniel Carter stood near the entrance with his daughter Emma pressed to his side, her small fingers wrapped around three of his. And he watched the room the way a man watches weather rolling in from the coast. Quietly, without urgency, he wore a charcoal suit he had pressed himself the night before. No boutonniere. No pocket square. His shoes were polished but not new, and anyone who looked closely, though few bothered, would have noticed that the left cuff showed the faintest crease where the iron had slipped. Emma wore a pale yellow dress with white buttons down the back, her blonde hair pulled into two braids she had insisted on doing herself. Mostly straight, slightly asymmetrical. Perfect. "Are there a lot of people?" she asked, not moving her eyes from the gathering crowd. "A fair number," Daniel said. "Do you know them?" "Some of them." She considered this. "Do they know you?" He looked down at her. "They think they do." The Hargrove family arrived in force, as they always did, a studied procession of money and coordination. Olivia's mother, Constance, wore ivory silk and a look of benevolent disapproval. Her two older brothers, Theodore and Grant, arrived side by side, already working their phones. And then came Victor Hargrove, Olivia's uncle, the one who had built the family's real estate empire in the 90s and had never once let anyone forget it. He was a large man in a dark navy suit, silver-haired, with the kind of handshake that was designed to establish hierarchy before a word was spoken. Victor scanned the entrance hall, let his gaze pass over Daniel without pausing, then passed back and stopped. "That's him?" he said, not whispering. The woman beside him, Daniel didn't know her name, made a quiet sound in her throat. "Olivia said he does something with cars?" Victor said, still not whispering. "He runs a shop," the woman confirmed, "out in Millhaven." Victor made a sound like a man discovering something unpleasant in his food. "And there's no family? No one on his side?" Apparently not. The hall had filled considerably by then, 200 guests, arranged in concentric rings of social proximity to the Hargrove family. The front rows belonged to blood, the middle rows to business, the back rows to obligation. On the groom's side of the aisle, 4 chairs sat empty. Then a fifth. Then a sixth. All the way to the end of the row, empty white chairs with ivory ribbon bows. And at the very end of the front row, a single chair with a small bouquet of white tulips on the seat. No one sat there, no one moved it. Emma noticed the empty chairs before Daniel did. "Is anyone sitting there?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. She looked up at him with something too precise to be called worry. "What if no one comes? Then we'll have extra room." She thought about this, and seemed to find it acceptable. Constance Hargrove approached with the careful grace of a woman who had been managing social disasters for 40 years. She extended her hand to Daniel with a warmth calibrated to the exact degree that acknowledged his presence without endorsing it. "Daniel," she said, "we're so glad you could arrive early." As if he were a vendor. As if arriving early were something that required acknowledgement. "Thank you for having me," he said. She looked at Emma with genuine softness. Children were always the innocent parties in Constance's moral universe. "And you must be Emma. Aren't you lovely?" Emma shook her hand with both of hers, the way Daniel had taught her. "Thank you for the dress. We found it at Callaway's." Constance smiled, uncertain whether this was charming or embarrassing, and retreated. Grant Hargrove drifted by without stopping, his eyes sweeping Daniel once with the practiced efficiency of a man who assessed people the way others assessed real estate: lot size, condition, potential resale. He moved on. Theodore was warmer, or performed warmth more convincingly. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder and said, "Big day. The way men say things when they have nothing to say, but feel the silence requires filling." "It is," Daniel said. Theodore searched his face for something: nervousness, gratitude, deference, and finding none of them, smiled uncertainly and moved on. The whispers began the way. Whispers always do. Adjacent, deniable. She's marrying down. She had to know. A mechanic, of all things. The man doesn't even have a groomsman. Does he have anyone? Does he know anyone? Emma heard them. She was 7 years old and had her mother's ears sharp, precise, nothing missed. She pressed closer to Daniel's side, and he felt her grip tighten across his fingers, not in fear but in something more complicated. Solidarity, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding how the world worked. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The officiant, a soft-spoken man named Reverend Walsh, caught Daniel's eye from across the room and gave him a small nod of professional sympathy. Daniel returned it neutrally. He wasn't here for sympathy. He checked his watch. 5:47. The ceremony was scheduled for 6. He put his hand back in his pocket. There are things you give up when you choose to disappear. Not lose, give up. Deliberately, carefully. With full knowledge of the cost, Daniel Carter had been 29 when he understood this. He had been sitting in a hospital room in the pre-dawn stillness, holding a hand that was no longer warm. And he had felt the particular silence of a life reorganizing itself around a new and permanent absence. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She had dark eyes and a laugh that arrived before she meant it to. And she had been the one who kept track of everything. The appointments, the obligations, the network of relationships that sustains a life in the world. When she died, all of it went with her. Not gradually. All at once. Emma had been 4 months old. What Daniel did in the months that followed, he did not talk about. Not because it was shameful, but because it was private in the way that grief is private. It belongs to the person who carries it, and explaining it to others always reduces it to something smaller than it was. He had a company. Had built it from nothing in his mid-20s, a structural engineering firm that had pivoted into infrastructure financing, and then into a private investment fund that had grown, quietly and without announcement, into something substantial. He had always been better at building things than displaying them. At 31, 6 months after Sarah died, he handed operational control to his managing director. A meticulous man named Charles Whitfield signed the papers and moved to Millhaven. Millhaven was a town of 12,000 people 40 miles from the city. It had a main street, a diner, 2 churches, a hardware store, and a mechanics shop called Carter & Son the Son, a small fiction, a name carried forward from the previous owner, a man named Pete Gallagher, who had sold Daniel the shop without asking many questions because Daniel had paid in full and seemed like someone who would take care of the place. Daniel learned to fix cars, not because he needed the money he didn't, though the shop was profitable in its modest way, but because he needed to do something with his hands, something real and physical, and with measurable results. A car came in broken. A car left running. There was clarity in that. There was no ambiguity. Emma grew up in the apartment above the shop, 3 rooms with a kitchen that smelled of oil and lavender because Daniel burned lavender candles to balance it out. She went to school 3 blocks away. She had friends. She was, by most measures Daniel could assess, happy. He met Olivia Hargrove at the shop. Her car, a silver Audi she drove too hard on mountain roads, had developed a suspension issue that 2 other mechanics had failed to diagnose correctly. She arrived on a Tuesday morning with the particular frustration of a competent person who had been told the wrong thing twice. Daniel listened to her describe the sound, asked her to drive it around the block while he rode in the passenger seat, and identified the problem in 11 minutes. She looked at him differently after that. Most people, he had found, did not expect mechanics to be precise. They expected amiability, approximation, a range of cost estimates. He gave her a single number, an explanation, and a time. She came back for the car at exactly the time he said and found it ready. They talked for 20 minutes in the parking lot. About nothing in particular: weather, the road conditions on Route 9, the coffee place down the street. She came back the following Saturday for an oil change that was not strictly necessary. He did not tell her about the company. Not because he was hiding it. Exactly. Because it did not feel relevant to who he was at the shop, in Millhaven, in the life he had chosen, and because he had learned, in the years since Sarah, that the first thing people rearranged when they discovered your money was their behavior toward you. He wanted to be seen as he was a man in a work shirt, careful and quiet, with a daughter who did her homework at the front desk every afternoon. Olivia seemed to see exactly that. She did not try to change him. She did not push. She arrived when she said she would, and left when she needed to, and somewhere in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, 6 months in, he realized he was glad to see her. Her family was less convinced. Victor Hargrove had run a financial background check. Daniel suspected this, but said nothing. The results would have shown a man with a modest business, no significant assets, no social media presence, no traceable professional history beyond the shop, a clean nothing. Which was precisely what it was designed to look like. Constance had been diplomatic about her concerns. Theodore and Grant had been less so. Victor had been direct. She runs a company, Victor had said to Olivia, not to Daniel. At a dinner Daniel had attended in careful silence. She has a responsibility to the people who work for her. Who are you bringing into that? Olivia had said, calmly, that she was bringing in someone she trusted. Victor had looked at Daniel the way men look at things they have decided to move around rather than engage with. Daniel had eaten his salmon and said nothing. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 6. By 5:50, the hall had arranged itself into its final configuration, guests seated. Musicians in position, the white runner straight down the center aisle. Reverend Walsh stood at the altar with his hands folded, and the particular expression of a man accustomed to witnessing the full spectrum of human behavior at significant moments. Daniel stood at the altar end of the aisle, Emma beside him, her hand still in his. She had the tulip bouquet from the empty chair, held in both hands. Slightly too large for her. She had asked if she could carry it, and Daniel had said yes without asking why. Victor Hargrove took his seat in the front row, turned, and directed his voice at the middle of the room with the practiced volume of a man who had spent decades being listened to. I've been to 100 weddings, he said to no one in particular, to everyone in range. Seen men from every background, senators, self-made millionaires, men who built things. A pause, and I've seen this. A gesture, vague but directional, toward the altar, toward Daniel. Someone laughed. 2 people, both quickly suppressed. Olivia could have had anyone, Victor continued, quieter now, almost private, but not. Mitchell Crane made a very clear, Victor. Constance's voice, low and final. He stopped. But the words remained in the air, the way words do when the room has heard them. Emma tilted her face up toward Daniel's. Her voice was very quiet. Do they not like us? Daniel crouched down to her level. He straightened one of her braids, the more crooked one. He kept his voice even. They don't know us yet, he said. Will they? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. She studied his face for evidence of distress, and found none. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked back at the room. Theodore appeared at Daniel's elbow. He doesn't mean anything by it, he said under his breath. Victor, it's fine, Daniel said. He has strong opinions about Theodore, it's fine. Theodore retreated with the guilty relief of a man who has done the minimum required to consider himself decent. At the back of the room, behind a pair of glass doors, Olivia was preparing. Daniel knew this. Could feel the particular weight of someone he cared about being forced to choose between things in real time. He had felt that weight before. He knew what it cost. He checked his watch. 5:54. He put his hand back at his side. The room buzzed with the low-frequency energy of a crowd that has witnessed something uncomfortable and is now performing the act of not having witnessed it. The musicians, a string quartet, began a piece, slightly early, possibly to paper over the silence. From the second row, a woman Daniel didn't know leaned to the woman beside her and said something he couldn't hear. They both looked at Emma. Emma looked back at them with the flat, direct gaze of a child who has not yet learned that staring is considered impolite, and both women looked away first. Daniel allowed himself the smallest internal acknowledgement of something adjacent to pride. The doors at the back opened. Olivia appeared. Whatever else could be said about the situation, whatever pressures and expectations and family dynamics had converged on this moment, Olivia Hargrove was genuinely beautiful in the way that people are beautiful when they are fully present, posture straight, expression clear, attention focused. She wore a dress that was simple in the way that expensive things are simple. She walked without hesitation. She met Daniel's eyes from 40 feet away and held them. Whatever the room thought, whatever Victor had said, whatever Constance had managed, or Grant had assessed, or Theodore had apologized for the length of that walk, none of it existed. Emma whispered. "She looks like the Snow Queen." Daniel looked down at her. "She does a little." The ceremony had been planned in 3 movements. The processional, the vows, the ring exchange. Reverend Walsh had run through it with them twice, efficiently, with the professional thoroughness of a man who understood that weddings contain more variables than rehearsals reveal. The processional completed. Olivia stood beside Daniel at the altar. Emma stood 1 step behind, tulips still in both hands, watching the Reverend with the focused attention she usually reserved for problems she was trying to solve. Reverend Walsh opened his book, and then he paused. The pause was small, a beat, perhaps 2, but Walsh was not a man given to unplanned pauses. Daniel noticed. Walsh leaned infinitesimally toward his assistant, a young man in a gray vest, who had moved silently to his side. The assistant murmured something. Walsh's expression did not change in any visible way. He straightened and addressed the room with practiced calm. "We'll have just a brief moment before we begin. Please, relax, enjoy the music." The quartet, apparently forewarned, moved into a longer piece. Victor Hargrove's voice from the front row. "What's the delay?" Walsh smiled professionally. "Only a moment, Mr. Hargrove." Victor's expression suggested that only a moment was not a satisfying answer. Constance placed her hand on Victor's arm. Daniel, standing at the altar, had not moved. His expression was unchanged, composed, present, without the fidgeting or self-consciousness that might have accompanied someone caught in an unflattering spotlight. He looked like a man waiting for a car to finish warming up. Patient, unhurried, entirely at ease. Olivia turned to him, her voice pitched below the music. "What's happening?" "We're waiting a few minutes." She searched his face. "For what?" He looked at her directly. "For the people I invited." A beat. "You invited people?" "A few." She looked at the empty chairs. "All of them. From the front row to the last." "Daniel, they'll be here." A pause. "I should have told you. I apologize for that." She turned this over in her expression, trying to locate the appropriate response to information that was both reassuring and somehow alarming. "Who did you invite?" He thought about how to answer this. "People I worked with," he said finally. A long time ago, Victor had been watching this exchange with the instinct of a man who built his fortune on reading rooms. Something in Daniel's stillness had shifted his attention. Not the words. Victor couldn't hear the words, but the quality of Daniel's composure. He had seen confident men before. He had seen people perform confidence. What he was watching was neither of those things. It was something quieter and more fundamental, and he couldn't name it, which was the thing that unsettled him. He turned to Grant. "Did you check this man out?" "I had someone run a standard background." "Nothing. Nothing as in clean, or nothing as in..." The sound arrived before the visual did. Not loud, the hall's windows were good but present. A low, synchronized register that was unmistakably not traffic, not distance. Something deliberate, something coordinated. Emma heard it first. She turned toward the windows. Daniel checked his watch. 6 o'clock exactly. He did not smile. He put his hand back at his side. The first car appeared at the end of the drive, then the second, then the third, fourth, fifth, black Rolls-Royce Phantoms, each one identical, moving in a formation so precisely spaced it looked choreographed. There were 7 of them. They turned into the drive in sequence and lined themselves along the front of Street Augustine's with the unhurried certainty of things that do not need to announce themselves. Inside the hall, the first person to look out the window was one of the musicians, who lost his place briefly and then recovered. Then a guest in the third row turned. Then another. The movement rippled backward through the room the way attention moves when something important is happening outside. Victor Hargrove stood up. He was not a man who stood without purpose. He stood because what he saw through the tall windows did not fit his existing model of the situation, and he needed a better angle to recalibrate. 7 Rolls-Royce Phantoms, matching, parked. He sat back down slowly. The hall had gone quiet in the particular way that a room goes quiet when 200 people simultaneously decide not to be the one talking. The car's engines cut one by one, not all at once, but sequentially, in the same order they had arrived, and the silence they left behind was the loudest thing in the room. The doors opened. Not the car doors yet. The hall doors, the tall oak ones at the back of Street Augustine's, opened by 2 members of the event staff who moved with more urgency than they had all afternoon. Through them came men in suits, not standard event security, but private staff, professionals, the kind of people whose entire professional purpose was to be unobtrusive while being completely effective. They fanned into the entrance without drama, checked the room in 3 seconds, and then turned to hold the doors. The car doors opened outside. The guests who were facing the windows watched. The guests who were not turned around. They came in quietly, which was the thing no one expected. 7 men and 1 woman, ages ranging from mid-40s to late 60s. Dressed in the way people are dressed when clothing is not a statement but a standard. They did not arrive at a rush. They did not look around with curiosity or self-consciousness. They walked the way people walk when they know exactly where they are going. At the front, slightly ahead of the others, Charles Whitfield, 61. A man who had been managing a $30 billion fund for the past 8 years with an unbroken record of performance and discretion. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit and moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned that efficiency of motion communicated more than any performance of authority. Behind him, Margaret Owens, General Counsel. 2 of the senior managing directors whose names appeared on filings that few people in this room had ever seen. The chairman of the fund's advisory board. 2 other partners. They walked down the center aisle without looking at the guests on either side. They stopped in front of the altar. Whitfield looked at Daniel. Then, slowly, he inclined his head, not a bow, not quite, but something in that register. A gesture of unambiguous deference from a man who deferred to very few people. "I apologize, Mr. Carter," Whitfield said. His voice was quiet but carried in the silence. "We were delayed in Brussels. It couldn't be helped." Emma watched this from beside her father. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough. Whitfield's eyes moved down to her. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. He addressed her directly. "Miss Carter, your father speaks of you often. It's a genuine pleasure." Emma looked up at Daniel. He nodded once. She looked back at Whitfield. "He doesn't talk about you," she said carefully. "But that's okay. He doesn't talk about a lot of things." A ripple through the watching partners. Not laughter, something warmer. Whitfield smiled. "That has always been his particular discipline," he said. They took their seats. 7 people filling the front row on the groom's side. The empty chairs filling. Not all of them, but enough. The room was absolutely still. Victor Hargrove was looking at Daniel Carter the way a man looks at a door he thought was a wall. The ceremony resumed. Reverend Walsh opened his book again. And this time no one delayed him. The room had found a different quality of attention, not the polite, performative attention of people waiting for a social obligation to complete, but something sharper, focused, the particular attentiveness of people who have realized they have been reading the room wrong and are now reading it more carefully. In the 3rd row, Grant Hargrove was on his phone. He kept his movements small, his screen angled away from his mother. Who would have said something? He was searching. The names he found on Whitfield's firm's advisory board, cross-referenced against each other, against the fund's registered documents, against the one name that appeared as founder, not managing director, not chairman founder, listed only with initials, and then, in a filing 6 years ago, a full name that had since been quietly removed from all public-facing materials. He read the name twice. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Daniel Carter, standing at the altar. He took his phone back out and read it again. By the time Reverend Walsh reached the vows, Margaret Owens had leaned to Whitfield and said something in a low voice. Whitfield had replied without looking at her. Whatever she had said, he had already known it, or had already considered it, or had already decided how to respond to it. The fund was not the secret, exactly. The fund was registered, publicly documented. Any serious financial professional would, with the right search, find it. The secret, if it could be called, that was the gap between what Daniel Carter appeared to be in Millhaven and what he actually was in a filing cabinet in a law office in the city. The gap he had maintained, deliberately and with considerable effort, for 8 years. He had not hidden it from Olivia out of deception. He had hidden it from everyone because the life he had built in Millhaven was real. The shop was real. The apartment above it was real. Emma's school and the lavender candles and the Tuesday afternoons when she sat at the front desk with her math homework were real. The money, the fund, the assets, the quarterly reports that Whitfield sent to his personal accountant was also real, but it was in a different category of reality. It existed the way infrastructure exists, necessary, foundational, but not the thing you think about when you think about your life. He had known, when he asked Olivia to marry him, that he would need to tell her before the ceremony. He had told her 3 weeks ago, in the kitchen above the shop, on a Thursday evening while Emma was asleep. He had shown her the filing. He had explained, briefly, who Whitfield was and what he did on Daniel's behalf. He had answered her questions, all of them, and then he had said, "This doesn't change anything I've told you." She had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said, "It changes some things. Does it change you wanting to marry me?" A longer pause. "No, then we'll figure out the rest." What he had not told her was that he had invited Whitfield and the others to the wedding. Not because he wanted to impress anyone he didn't, but because Whitfield had been trying for 3 years to schedule a matter that required Daniel's direct involvement. And because the matter had finally become urgent enough that Whitfield had flown from Brussels overnight, and because Daniel had said, "If you need me that urgently, you can find me at my wedding," which was not entirely true. The real reason was simpler and less flattering to analyze. He had wanted, just once, for Emma to see that her father was known, not for his sake. For hers. She was 7. She would not understand the fund, or the filings, or the nature of what Whitfield managed. But she would understand the way a man like Whitfield looked at her father. Children understand regard. They carry it. This was the thing Victor Hargrove would never know, that the convoy had not been an announcement. It had been a gift. For a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress holding someone else's tulips, who had asked if anyone was going to come, Victor Hargrove approached Daniel during the brief recess between ceremony and reception, the 15 minutes, when guests milled and photographs were staged, and the catering staff repositioned tables with focused efficiency. He did it correctly. In the sense that he waited until Whitfield and the others had moved away, and Daniel was momentarily alone. He walked up with the careful stride of a man reconfiguring his posture. "Daniel," he said. The name came out differently than it had before. Managed, now. Considered. "I want to say, Victor." Daniel's voice was even. "It's a good day. Let's keep it that way." Victor blinked. He was not accustomed to being interrupted. He was especially not accustomed to being interrupted gently, without hostility, by someone who had just been publicly disrespected by him 40 minutes earlier. "I may have been—" "You were," Daniel said simply. Victor absorbed this. "Yes. I was." He seemed to find it difficult to remain in the particular posture he'd arrived with. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." Daniel turned slightly toward him. That was the point. Victor looked at him with an expression that had moved past calculation into something more honest. Uncertainty. The particular uncertainty of a man who has built his sense of order on a set of assumptions and found the assumptions misaligned with reality. "Why didn't you say anything?" Victor asked. Daniel considered this. He looked across the room to where Emma was standing with Whitfield's assistant, a young woman named Rebecca, who had produced, from somewhere, a small stuffed rabbit that Emma was examining with focused interest. "Because if I'd said something," Daniel said, "you'd have treated me differently, and then I wouldn't have known who you were." Victor was quiet. "Now I do," Daniel said. "It was not cruel. It was simply accurate. He said it the way you state something that exists independently of anyone's feelings about it. Theodore appeared with 2 glasses of water, offering them with the vague generosity of a man trying to reduce the temperature of a situation he hadn't fully followed. Daniel took one. Victor did not. Grant appeared from Theodore's left, and his expression was different from Victor's more complicated, less resolved. He had the look of a man sitting with information he hadn't finished processing. "My firm worked with Whitfield's group," he said. "Last year. The infrastructure refinancing in the Northeast Corridor." He paused. "I didn't. I never connected. There was no reason to," Daniel said. Grant nodded slowly. "The founder's name in those filings. Yes, that's you." "It is." A pause. "The anonymity was deliberate," Grant said. "It was not a question." "It was." Grant nodded again, as if this answered something else he'd been puzzling over. He excused himself and walked back toward the larger room with the slightly altered gait of a man who has just learned that a building he thought was 2 stories is actually 12. Victor was still standing there. Daniel looked at him. "She loves you," Victor said finally. It came out less reluctant than he intended. "I know," Daniel said. "I may have made things harder than they needed to be." Daniel picked up Emma's tulip bouquet from the table beside him. She had set it down when she went to look at the rabbit and straightened the stems. "You were looking after her," he said. "That's not nothing." Victor had the slightly uncertain expression of a man being offered more grace than he expected. Daniel handed him the bouquet. "Can you put this somewhere safe?" "Emma will want it for the reception." Victor took it. He held it like something he wasn't sure how to carry. Olivia found him near the window at the side of the hall, during the same 15-minute interval, in the narrow corridor that ran between the main hall and the back garden. He was looking out at the garden, where the reception tables were being set under strings of warm light, and 2 staff members were having a quiet argument about a centerpiece. She came to stand beside him without saying anything immediately. Outside, the Rolls-Royces were still parked along the drive. A maintenance man was walking past them with a bucket, and stopping to look at each one the way people stop, to look at things that shouldn't exist where they exist. "You told me," Olivia said, 3 weeks ago. "I did. But this part," she gestured toward the drive, toward the window, toward the general shape of the afternoon. "You didn't tell me this part." "No," he said. "I should have." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the staff argument about the centerpiece resolved. One of them walking away with the offending item. "Were you testing me?" she asked. Not with accusation. With genuine inquiry. He turned to look at her. "No," he said. It was unambiguous. She believed him. She had learned, in 18 months, that his no was an absolute 0. He didn't use it as a placeholder. Then why? He looked back at the garden. "I've been invisible for a long time," he said. "By choice. And it was the right choice, for a long time." A pause. "But Emma asked me this morning if anyone was coming." Olivia turned toward him slightly. She asked it the way kids ask questions when they already understand the situation, and they're looking for evidence that they're wrong. He stopped. "I didn't want her to spend this day thinking her father had no one." Olivia was very still. "She has me," he added. "That's enough. But I wanted her to see." He stopped again, like a man who has arrived at the edge of something articulate and found it doesn't reduce to language very comfortably. "She'll grow up. She'll be in rooms with people like Victor. And I wanted her to carry something. Some memory of a day when someone like Whitfield came through a door and walked across a room because her father was the person in the room worth walking to." The garden lights came on outside. Someone had switched them early. The afternoon was still pale, but they were warm and small, and they made the tables look like something from a different century. Olivia said, "You could have just told me." "I know. I would have. I know." He turned to her fully. "You would have handled it perfectly. You handle everything perfectly. A beat. That's one of the things I love about you. But I didn't want this to be handled. I wanted it to just happen." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I spent 20 minutes this morning thinking I might be making a terrible mistake." He nodded. I know. Your uncle. He's not my uncle. He's yours. Victor made a very good argument for calling the whole thing off. He probably did. It wasn't about the money. Or the suit. Or the empty chairs. She paused. He said, I didn't really know you. Daniel said nothing. And the terrible thing, she said carefully, is that he was right. But not in the way he meant. She turned back to the garden. I didn't know about the fund. The filings. The convoy. A pause. But I knew you. The actual you. The one who pressed his suit himself and brought tulips for an empty chair and bent down to fix Emma's braid when she was nervous. She stopped. That's the same person, he said. I know. She looked at him sideways. That's why I didn't call it off. They returned to the altar. The difference was not dramatic. The room was the same room. The same guests, the same white chairs and ivory ribbons. Reverend Walsh stood where he had stood before. His book opened to the same page. The quartet resumed from the same measure. But the quality of the room had changed. It was quieter in a different way. The earlier quiet had been the quiet of performed decorum, the social contract of 200 people, agreeing not to say what they were thinking. This quiet was something else, attentive, something that wanted to watch without interfering. Victor sat in his seat with Olivia's tulip bouquet resting across his knee, and he did not make any sounds. Constance held a handkerchief she had not opened yet. Grant sat with his hands in his lap and his phone in his pocket. Whitfield and his partner sat in the front row on the groom's side, and they were exactly as still as the people who have learned that stillness is the highest form of attention. Emma stood beside her father at the altar, the slight asymmetry of her braids still intact, and she held onto the hem of her yellow dress with both hands because she had nothing else to hold, and the moment seemed to require some form of grip. Reverend Walsh began. The words of a wedding ceremony are ancient and ordinary, worn smooth by repetition into something close to music. To have and to hold. In sickness and in health. As long as you both shall live. Walsh delivered them without embellishment, which was the correct choice. Daniel said his vows in a low, level voice. He did not look at the room. He did not look at Whitfield, or Victor, or Emma. He looked at Olivia. The vows he had written himself were short. They did not make promises about wealth or security or professional partnership. They made promises about presence, about being in the room, about not disappearing when things became difficult, about choosing, every day, to be the version of himself that showed up and stayed. I have been invisible for a long time by choice, he said, and the room shifted slightly because this was not the language of standard vows. And I would like to stop. I would like Emma to see me as someone who is present. And I would like you to be the person I'm present with. That's what I'm promising. Olivia's vows were longer. They were honest in the way that someone is honest when they have decided to stop managing and simply say the thing. She said she had spent most of her adult life in rooms full of people who had decided what she was before she spoke. She said she had mistaken control for security and productivity for happiness. She said she had driven her car up and down Route 9 more times than was strictly necessary, because there was a mechanic shop on the access road where someone listened before they answered. I don't want to manage this, she said. I want to live it. A pause. I want Emma to know that the women in her life can say that without it being a weakness. Emma made a small sound that was not quite a word. Reverend Walsh waited a respectful moment, then completed the ceremony. The rings were exchanged. The pronouncement was made. When Daniel and Olivia turned to face the room, Emma inserted herself between them without asking permission, and took a hand from each of them, the tulips abandoned somewhere behind her, and she looked out at the gathered faces with the directness of a child who has decided she belongs in the frame. The applause that began in the back rows where the guests furthest from the Hargrove orbit sat. The colleagues and friends who had come out of genuine affection for Olivia spread forward. It reached the middle rows. It reached the Hargrove family, who joined it with varying degrees of wholeheartedness. It reached Whitfield and his partners, who clapped with the contained precision of people for whom applause is not the primary mode of expression. Victor Hargrove applauded. He did it correctly. He looked at no one in particular while he did it. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted toward the gray gold of early evening, and the garden lights under the canopy were warm and full, and somewhere in the distance, a car door closed on one of the 7 black phantoms as the drivers settled in for the reception wait, and the sound was small and inconsequential, the way the sounds of powerful things so often are when they are at rest. The reception was everything the ceremony was not. The ceremony had been managed, curated, sequenced, scripted. The reception simply happened, the way good evenings happen when the architecture is right, and people stop performing long enough to be themselves. Whitfield found Daniel at the edge of the garden near the end of the first hour. The Brussels matter was resolved in 12 minutes of conversation, a restructuring question that required Daniel's signature authority. Nothing complex, resolved with the efficient shorthand of 2 people who had worked together long enough to compress information into small exchanges. Whitfield produced a document. Daniel read it, signed it, handed it back. Whitfield put it in his jacket pocket. "We'll be out of your evening in half an hour," Whitfield said. "You're welcome to stay," Daniel said. The appropriate moment was the arrival. The appropriate departure is before the cake. Whitfield allowed himself a small pause. "Your daughter is remarkable." Daniel looked across the garden to where Emma was sitting with Rebecca, Whitfield's assistant, had proven unexpectedly excellent company for a 7-year-old, and appeared to be conducting some kind of negotiation involving the stuffed rabbit and a bread roll. "She is," he said. "She introduced me to 3 people at my own table," Whitfield said. "She told me that Rolls-Royces were invented in England, and that she knew this because her father had once explained how the engine worked." A pause. "I did not tell her that I have never actually examined the engine of a Rolls-Royce." Daniel smiled. It was brief and private. "You built something good here," Whitfield said. He was not talking about the fund. "I'm still building it," Daniel said. Whitfield nodded once. "We will require you for the board review in May. Presence optional, as usual, your proxy is acceptable. But preferred. I'll consider it." "That means no." "It means I'll consider it." Whitfield accepted this with the equanimity of a man who had learned that Daniel's consideration was worth waiting for. He inclined his head again, the same gesture as before, and moved toward his partners. Constance Hargrove appeared from Daniel's left. She had a quality of appearing rather than arriving, a skill developed over decades of navigating rooms like this one. She stood beside him for a moment without speaking, watching the same view of the garden. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Mrs. Hargrove." Constance. "You don't. I enabled a situation that made you and your daughter uncomfortable at your own wedding." Her voice was matter-of-fact. She was not making a performance of contrition. "That's something I should have prevented." Daniel was quiet. "I knew Victor would say something," she said. "I thought I could manage him. I was wrong." She turned to look at him. "I should have done more. You stopped him when it mattered. Later than I should have." He looked at her for a moment. "Emma doesn't hold grudges," he said. "She forgets things quickly and moves on. She gets that from her mother." A pause. "I'm working on it." Constance made a sound that in another context would have been a laugh. "Olivia is very like me in some ways," she said. "She has always wanted to understand what she's choosing before she chooses it." A pause. "I think she understands now." "I think so too." Constance nodded once. In the manner of a woman who has said what she came to say and has no need to pad it out. She moved back into the reception with the same quality of appearing, in reverse. Grant appeared, briefly, with a handshake that was different from the one Theodore had offered, firmer, more direct, carrying the particular weight of a man who is acknowledging something with his body because he hasn't finished processing it enough to say it with words. Daniel shook it, and Grant moved on. Victor did not appear. He sat at the family table with the tulip bouquet still in front of him, slightly wilted now, and he watched the evening unfold with the attention of a man who is learning something late. Emma found Daniel near the end of the reception, when the garden lights had deepened and the string quartet had given way to a recorded playlist someone had connected to the garden speakers. She had grass on her shoes. She had taken them off at some point, he noted, and her braids had come almost entirely undone on one side. And she was carrying the stuffed rabbit under her arm. She leaned against him the way she had since she was small, the full side weight of a child who has simply decided you are the most reliable surface in the vicinity. The man with the gray hair said you built something, she said. What did he mean? Daniel looked down at her. The garden was behind them, warm and full. Olivia somewhere in it, laughing with someone. Her voice clean and certain. The cars were still on the drive, most of them. The sun was almost gone. He was talking about a business, Daniel said. But he looked at you the way Mr. Gallagher looks at his old truck, Emma said. Not like a business. Daniel looked at her. Mr. Gallagher looks at his truck like it's the most important thing, she said. He looks at his building like it's just a building. He was quiet for a moment. Whitfield, the man with the gray hair, he's been taking care of something I built a long time ago. When your mom was still alive. Emma received this in the direct, careful way she received all information about her mother. Not flinching. Attending. Was it good? She asked. The business? Yes. No, she said. Building it. Was it good when you were doing it? He thought about this honestly. It was, he said. But the best thing I built after that was the shop, she said. Close. She looked up. Me? Close. She made the face she made when math was wrong and required re-examination. Then what? He pulled her slightly closer. This, he said. Meaning the evening, the garden, the warm light, Olivia's voice behind them, the whole inexact shape of a life that had been rebuilt from the right materials and was standing. She thought about this. Okay, she said finally. That works. They left the way Daniel had arrived. Simply, no motorcade. No announcement. Olivia's car, the silver Audi, suspension repaired waiting in the side lot. Emma asleep across the back seat before they reached the highway. The stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Her bouquet of white tulips on the seat beside her. Olivia drove. The city lights spread out below the highway before they descended toward Millhaven. She drove the way she drove when she wasn't thinking about the road efficiently, slightly too fast on the curves, her hands at 10 and 2. Your house or mine? She asked. My house is above a garage, he said. That wasn't a real question. He looked out at the lights. Mine for now. Yours eventually. When Emma's ready. She likes my house. She likes the bathtub. She's reserving judgment on everything else. Olivia smiled at the road. That seems like sound methodology. They drove. The radio played something neither of them was listening to. The highway curved. The city receded. The Millhaven exit appeared, the small green sign in the headlights, and Olivia took it without hesitation. In the back, Emma shifted in her sleep. The rabbit survived. The tulips held. Nothing was perfect. Nothing was resolved in the way that stories resolve things, with clean endings and complete understanding. Victor would remain Victor. The fund would continue generating reports that Daniel would continue mostly not reading. Constance would manage. Grant would circle. Theodore would apologize periodically and mean it. Olivia would run her company. Daniel would run his shop. Emma would attend 3rd grade and do her homework at the front desk and grow into, probably, someone neither of them could fully anticipate. There would be harder things ahead. Not problems, nothing so manageable as problems. The harder things that come with any life actually lived. Incompatible timelines. Unequal sacrifices. Days when the person beside you is entirely opaque and you have to choose to trust anyway. Emma's questions, which would become more precise as she became more capable of precision. The empty chair at Christmas. The anniversaries that arrived as ambushes. Daniel knew this. He was not a man who expected simplicity. He looked back at Emma in her yellow dress, asleep with her braids undone, and then forward at the road, and then sideways at Olivia's profile against the dark window, and he registered the exact quality of the moment, not as something to hold on to, because you can't hold on to moments, but as something to have seen clearly while it was happening. That was enough. That was, he thought, the whole point. The town lights appeared in the valley below. Small and ordinary, and entirely sufficient. Olivia took the last curve before the access road without slowing down. The shop appeared on the right, dark and locked, the sign in the window reading closed in the practical way that real places are closed. Above it, the apartment windows were dark. She pulled in, killed the engine. Silence. Then Emma, from the back, without opening her eyes. "We're home." "We are," Daniel said. She settled back into the rabbit. Good. Outside, the night was ordinary and complete. A street light. A parked truck. The distant sound of something that was just the town breathing. Daniel got out. He opened the back door and gathered Emma without waking her. The familiar weight of a sleeping child, which is different from any other weight in the world. She pressed her face into his shoulder. He carried her up the stairs. Olivia followed. Behind them, the 7 Rolls-Royces were already gone, back to wherever important things return to when they are no longer needed. The drive at Street Augustine's was empty. The hall was being cleared. The chairs were being stacked. The tulips were wilting in the way flowers always do, with total commitment. The city continued. The highway continued. The world continued. In a small apartment above a mechanic shop in Millhaven, a light came on. The things worth having are rarely announced. They are simply present day after day. Unremarkably, until the day you understand what they are. By then, they have been there all along.